lot of moving parts.
Now I'm recording. Dear students, I'm so sorry for all this mess. I hope we'll be a more successful in this further. So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce to you my dear colleague, Michael Ray Smith. And please, Michael, introduce yourself further, because I think you'll be better with it. So go on.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to very honored to be part of your class. The idea today is media bias, and if we have time, perhaps your students could say a word about themselves. I have been a journalist for more than a decade. I still write, and I've been teaching for a couple of decades, mostly in the United States, but for the last 3 years at LCC International University, which is in Klaipėda, Lithuania. We have 775 students from 65 countries. 25% of our students are Ukrainian. And we have just, you think of the country, it's represented here. So would it be okay for the students to say their name in a word, or should we just jump into it?
Yeah, exactly. If please, guys, if you can, use your mics and introduce yourselves. If not, please just write your names. I may just read their names in case they are in Cyrillic. So we have here Anastasia, or for short Nastya, Anna, Arthur, Elizabeth, Catherine, Nazar, Polina. One more, Snezhana, Sophia again.
Are all the students from Ukraine?
Yeah, but they are not. Most of them are not there geographically. Some may be abroad at the time, but all of them are students of Karazin University in Kharkiv.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's talk. I want to talk to you a bit about media bias. I'm going to talk to you about the 4 theories of the press. I'm going to mention what students, particularly in LCC, are saying about the news these days, and then a couple ideas about solutions on what to do when we identify media bias. Give me just a second here to see if I can make this screen. Looks like it's going to be partial screen. There's a way to do this. A bit of news just about these different ideas. We have 4 classic theories of the press that are worldwide. It's not just United States, although a lot of what I'll share has a USA quality to it. You may be familiar with these. If you don't know them by their specific names, you should be aware that you're running into this type of approach to news on a regular basis. Here's the 4 theories. One's the authoritarian. You could figure that one out. Somebody is in authority, and it's the government, and it's a lot of control over the press. Right on the other end, communist Soviet theory, very similar. The big difference is the authoritarian, you can't privately owned press. Mass media in the owns all the media. The authoritarian theory, and while the slide says it's freedom of the press, it doesn't justice to what it means. What it means is controlled press. The press can you could even publish permits should decide talk to anybody in the world still, it's here. I've lost the recording portion, but shall we continue? There we go. Okay, we're back in business. So when you have the two extremes, the authoritarian and the Soviet approach, obviously a lot of control there, but people would say even in free countries, UK, United States, and so on, the press has a certain bias to it. So here's a cartoon. The first part you can't read, but it says, "Why are you smashing our equipment? Why do you put us in jail? We're reporters. Why do you torture us? Sometimes even kill us?" And the joke is, because you make us look bad. And that is basically the reason why there's control of the press. The press sometimes provides an unflattering picture of people in authority. Couple terms here. We have a spectrum. Maybe you've talked about propaganda in some of your classes, and we talk about white propaganda, which could be true, but it's still supposed to flatter an organization. And then we have black propaganda, which is absolutely not true. Or another way to say it is disinformation, and it's deliberately misleading versus misinformation. Sometimes people get it wrong. And then we have this thing called a hoax. And you say, why would any reliable organization ever have a hoax? Well, it happens. It happens. We know that in the United States, for instance, the trust, whether you're, these are the two dominant parties, Republican and one color, red, Democrats, and blue, you can just see the most recent year, 2017, the Republicans are saying, we just don't trust the media. Democrats, a little more trust, but still, overall, audiences are very skeptical of mass media. And if we polled your students, which I hope someday we can, they're going to tell you, we don't trust any of it, generally speaking. But the people that tend to have more influence, in the United States at least, are people who are considered conservative. Here's just a historic example from 200 years ago. Benjamin Franklin worked for a newspaper his brother, half-brother actually, owned, and his half-brother wouldn't let him publish information, so he came up with his own name, nom de plume, you might say, silence do good, and he would write information, but it could be misleading. We didn't have such a thing as fact checking 200 years ago in the United States. Or how about this one? Did you ever hear of the moon hoax? 100 years later, in 1835, the Sun in New York literally published in its newspaper that there were beings living on the moon, and they have a civilization. And an astronomer was quoted as verifying this information. It was so compelling. It went on for weeks. It was so compelling. Christians thought that they needed to send missionaries to the moon to get these angelic beings saved. Or even more recently, another 100 years. And we have in the United States a guy named Orson Welles who had the Mercury Theater. And in 1938, it was called War of the Worlds, based on a novel. And it said, in this drama, radio drama, these actors were saying that Martians had attacked in New Jersey. And some people in the audience believed it. And we have cases of a little bit of panic. One guy fell down the steps, but another family, the father was about to shoot his children. because he thought Martians are coming. We got to do something. That is a classic example of what we call media effects. And what we would say today is, if this would ever happen again, you would probably change stations, radio stations, to see if anybody else is broadcasting it, so you know that it was fiction. And by the way, during the program, a couple of times they said this is a dramatic production of the novel War of the Worlds. This is a very difficult chart to read, but it shows bias. A advertising executive who's an attorney tried to create a at a glance chart to show you which is the best publications or wire services. So you may have heard of the Associated Press. It is the largest wire service in the world. Then underneath it is Reuters, then Bloomberg. So this area represents what she considers neutral. And as you go to the right, it represents what she would call politically, not just conservative, but extreme conservatism. And if you go to the left, over here, same. So she's saying right around here is the sweet spot where you can count on the information being reliable. These margins represent a point of view, what we would say in the United States, left wing, over here, right wing. Here's another way to look at it. This shows, again, the sweet spot. You may have heard of, I'm sure you've heard of BBC. That actually is considered very reliable, although it has obviously a United Kingdom quality. And then in the United States, we have National Public Radio, a couple of legacy newspapers, Washington Post, so on. And conservatives, I should say, consider these to be what we use labels like liberal, and we need to unpack that. But for the sake of time, let's not do that. You may have heard of Fox News. It's considered on the right. Huffington Post, considered on the left. CNN, USA Today, not as good, but somewhat central, somewhat neutral. A few years ago, 2018, I did a survey with students in the United States to ask them which media, which singular medium is considered the best. And you'll see, typically we collapse, strongly agree. Which one is most reliable? That was our, to make a statement, you would say CNN is most reliable. Do you strongly agree, have no opinion, disagree? So if you look at the percentages, you'll see that CNN did pretty well. You put them together, about 45%, half the people said that they thought that they weren't reliable. But if you drop down to the networks, even greater, 49%. If you go to New York Times, half the people said very, very reliable. And we'd have to tease through some of these percentages, and my august colleague has this if you're here to do it. Then we asked about social media, and not surprising, even a couple of years ago, people did not think Facebook was a reliable source of information. They did think Google, 62% thought Google was very reliable. And you could keep going down. Instagram, a lot of you use Instagram. So a couple of years ago, it was considered not as reliable. So what are we going to do? These days, we're looking at LCC students, 775 students from 65 countries. And I'll be doing a survey in January. I'll talk to your professor about that. Maybe he will help me get that survey to you. But last year I did what we call a beta test, kind of a trial run, and talked to 80 students at LCC, and I asked them to respond to a questionnaire, particularly the news in Ukraine, because it's every day, right? and I asked them about their home country. I asked them in particular about Russian-based news. And you could probably predict what the students said. Just to give you some orientation, here's Lithuania. Beside it, it's kind of odd. We have this Russian country. This is Russia, but we have this part of Russia called Kaliningrad. And I have students from Kaliningrad. And then here's Ukraine. So you kind of get a sense of where we're located. We have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They're typically called the Baltic states because we're on the Baltic Sea. We asked some questions. I asked about all kinds of news sites, but over and over and over, the students talked about Russian news. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm presenting the information, which is what we try to do as scholars. We present the information. We try not to freight it. We just try to report it. So students at LCC over and over again talked about Russian news as being false, a lot of disinformation. Some people called it lies. And here are just a few of the countries represented, even Belarus, South Korea, Latvia, Georgia, and Armenia and Russia. One Russian student found the news from Russia unreliable, and he called it total dark propaganda. This is not unusual. In the United States, we're finding out that more and more Americans are challenging the credibility of the news. Again, your professor has this program, so you could look at this link if you wanted to drill down a bit. We say about 50% in the United States, about 50% of people say media is biased. I will tell you anecdotally, when I talk to my students in class, I don't know if I have any that say, yeah, I absolutely trust BBC or I absolutely trust Reuters. They typically say, I question it at all. In the United States, people are worried that this distrust of media could ruin the country. An unusual finding, even though most Americans say that they find news unreliable, biased, they typically have one reporter that they find to be consistently reliable. So that's a ray of hope. Here's some student opinion regarding Russia. One student from Ukraine said the state media is lying constantly. Another student said, I'm Ukrainian. I've seen many fake news stories told by Ukrainian reporters themselves. Again, I'm not saying that these students are accurate. This is what they're saying, okay? This is their opinion. Here's another one. News from Russia is not true at all. A student from Belarus said, I could say that the best source of news is an independent one. And the student said, the source she likes is, perhaps you know it, tut.by. And Iranians are biased. Here's a few more of the students. Armenian student sources are biased. A student from Moldova said, non-governmental news can be trusted. A Russian student born in Lithuania praised the BBC and Twitter. Twitter is very popular in the United States, not very. Again, I'm telling you more of the same, and perhaps it's too much of the same type of information. My point in the survey I conducted with the LCC students who come from 65 countries is to find out, is there one place that they are happy with the news they receive? And then I said, which country, which news source is the most unreliable? And so you just see over and over again. Here's a Russian student who said it is propaganda and consists of lies. Here's another student who said, since much of the Russian population is convinced that this is a righteous war, I would imagine that Russian-based news contains a high degree of propaganda. Here's more of the same. I'll just drop down here and say, Lithuanian said, Russia to provocation. Please do not misunderstand. This is not, let's beat up Russia. This was meant to be a public opinion survey, a questionnaire to find out what people were thinking. Here's a student from Albania who says she only reads Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's Instagram post. I said her, for his diet of news. Others said it's just appalling lies. In fact, bad lies that don't match up with each other. In other words, the lies are based on other lies. So we did that. I did that survey in early 2023. I'm going to do another survey, and I'm going to talk about specific news sources and use, again, you may have heard of what we call the Likert scale, where you can ask people the intensity of their opinion. Do they strongly agree? Go on. Some of the places I'm going to ask students about. So they would be asked to evaluate each of these, and the following news source is: do I strongly agree? Do I agree? Do I have no opinion? Do I disagree or strongly disagree? And I go through all these different ones, and perhaps if time permits, you can let me know what I'm missing here. This is LRT is a Lithuanian site, but I'm guessing you're familiar with this, Medusa, and some of these others. So let me turn a corner and say, okay, what can you do? If you are like most of my students and you have great distrust of mass media and news, whether it's from your country or from an international source like BBC or Reuters or Associated Press, what can you do? There are a couple places that you go. PolitiFact is a good one. PunditFact is a good one. And you just put it in the browser and ask, is this true? And Snopes, have you heard of Snopes? It's an American product, but it's a good one, particularly for the funny things like during the Trump administration, supposedly at Thanksgiving, a popular American holiday in November, Trump took the turkeys that's part of the celebration of Thanksgiving. The president of the United States pardons a turkey, so the turkey will not be killed. There was a report circulating that Trump, to show his disregard for the previous president, had those turkeys that were pardoned killed. So it's not true, but you could have found that at this website. And there are other things that you know. You're a university student, so when you read something, you should, and I bet you do, you consider the source. You check the author. Who is the person that penned this thing? You look for supporting documents or sources. Check another website, see if you can find it, check the date. Also, sometimes people present news in a parody, like we have United States Saturday Night Live. I'm sure you've seen it, and it's a parody. And we have late night comedians that are always talking about current events, but often in a humorous way, and your own bias and experts. That's just at a glance, quick way to ask yourself, how can I spot fake news? This is my contact information, not that you would like to stay in touch, but I do enjoy talking to your professor, and we interact. As a matter of fact, he has been chosen to help LCC with its approach to a better university. So with that, I'll turn it back to our professor, and we can call it a day, or we can talk a little bit, whatever's your pleasure.
Yeah, well, let's use the rest of the time we have. Thank you so much, Michael. Dear guys, let's use this time. I'm sorry for the noise. I'm in the cafe because I consider it the most reliable place to use the internet. The way it is. Okay, let's first pose the questions to the lecturer, and then we expect, Michael, for you to pose the questions to us. So maybe we may try with deciding which Ukrainian sources you deem the most reliable. Please. You may just talk something, say something about yourself. Please do it. Guys, do you have the access to your mics? Don't let it just hang. Okay,
So, in your opinion, does the biased press have some useful functions in society?
Yes, we depend on the circulation of news for many reasons. To be a healthy society, we have to have what we call a free flow of information. If we don't have a free flow of information, then a lot of bad things can happen. We want to know what our elected officials are up to, but we also enjoy finding out what movie, or perhaps you have Netflix, what's trending. So it's a mechanism. We call it functionalism, and it says society is self-correcting. It's self-correcting. We could identify a problem, and through this organic process, and perhaps the sovereignty of God, make sure these problems are addressed. And without that, we would probably have what we would call a pathological, that is a sick society. And people would argue today that we have a sick society because mass media has not done its job well.
Okay, thank you. And I have another one. So, studying modern trends in the development of the institution of reputation, noticing how the culture of cancellation is popularized, I wonder if it can be argued that the modern world model of social responsible press is crowding out other, especially libertarian.
We have a phrase we use sometimes. It's called ideological construct. Sometimes words to explain what we're trying to explain have a series of concepts built, and you have to go to make sure sharing that you're clear. So the social responsibility of the press, it sounds so honorable, doesn't it? This is the preferred way of information. Sometimes people talk about the superiority of the libertarian press, and each has its benefit. So is what you may have heard when Churchill apparently said something like this: democracy is the worst form except for all the rest. So what I would say is social theory is, what else can you do? We need, I think, a neutral, possible detached press that gives us all sides of the issue and let the audience make a decision. Now, there's a lot to that. Again, that how you and I, or you come from one country, I come from another country, we're predisposed to think a certain way. But I guess I would say back to critics, how else can we do this? How else can we keep society informed and healthy, except to try to keep that free flow of as many people as possible, knowing that, you know, we get it wrong, biases and prejudices, but we try to overcome them to tell the story faithfully and accurately.
Any more guys, more questions?
I have a question. I have a question. What do you feel is the most influential propaganda campaign you can think of?
If I understand the question, you're asking which country has more propaganda than any other?
Yes.
Well, I, as an American, understand Eastern Europe and the rest of the world through North American eyes. And you may know this, Americans sometimes are very provincial. We know a little bit about Canada, a little bit about Mexico, and very little about the rest of the world. But based on the what I have seen since I've been in Lithuania for 3 years, based on what I've been reading and seeing, I would like to recommend on YouTube, there's a 3-part series called The Lost War of Communism. And I've learned quite a bit about what happens when communism or an oppressive state controls a country. So I feel a little bit odd saying this, but it just seems like Russia is deliberately trying to mislead people. And I have a colleague, I'll be seeing this colleague later today at a Christmas party. And she's very pro-Russian. And she says to me, when I tell her what you and I are talking about, she will say, Americans don't understand. And she will defend Russia. She's actually a professor at LCC, but she's very pro-Russian. And I honestly, I can't understand why she says the things she says, because the information to me seems very, very misleading.
Can I ask?
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
How do you think can mass media be improved in Ukraine, and what should we do to get better?
All these students are asking very insightful questions. If we could agree that mass media can be improved, regardless of country, United States, Ukraine, Lithuania, where do we start? There is a war going on, and there is a tendency for all sides to take an example of what would be considered an outrageous abuse, the bombing of a school, for instance, or someone has been killed in a firefight, and that person's body is treated without respect. And we take those little examples, right? You take a photograph, and then you can say all that you want to say. So I please take this in the spirit it's offered. I think the Ukrainian government wants to make sure everybody is united in the war effort. So sometimes they're pushing images and stories that to keep the support for the war effort. And I understand that. And the United States did that in World War II. They did it in the Vietnam War, which, by the way, I'll just add quickly. We had this huge war in Vietnam. A lot of American soldiers were killed. Now, Americans go to the same country on vacation. You know, so the person you considered your enemy 20 years ago is now leading a tour group. So opinions change drastically. I guess what I would say, and this is a question for one of your other classes, but it has to do with persuasion. And so United States has a whole arm that deals with the State Department to try to get the rest of the world to think of the United States as a wonderful country. And so they have mass media, TV shows like or movies like American Graffiti, you know, and we have jazz and so on. But what we know for sure, this next point is really an important one. It's not from, I'm repeating it, but it's not my idea. You got to be careful in persuasion. If you push it too far, your audience will reject it. So in my opinion, what needs to be done is to practice this type of mainstream, get both sides of the story type of journalism. And that way you're not fretting it one way or the other. And I think personally, readers and listeners, audiences are smart and they can figure it out. Given a chance, they will figure it out. They will say to themselves, this is propaganda, or they always say to themselves, that seems like, you know, that reporter is not freighting it. It's not slanting the news. He or she is trying to be as best as humanly possible, coming down squarely in the middle. It's hard. It's hard. It's very hard. Some people call it a posture of neutrality, but it's a goal that we try to seek.
Yes, and I have another one. Do you know any Ukrainian media, and which ones do you think are the best?
No, I don't. I know the international news sources, but you're and I'm sorry, I don't. I would have to ask my students. So sorry about that.
Yes, I see. Thank you.
I have a question. What international resource do you prefer?
Well, because I speak English and I read in English, it's easy for me to attend to BBC, for instance. We do have in UK, The Guardian. It's quite popular and easy to read, easy to have access to. And there are other publications worldwide that we actually have a publication called the Tribune that's been in business in England for, it's part of the New York Times. So that would be, did I mention Reuters? So Reuters, New York Times, I mentioned New York Times, but Reuters, BBC would be my picks. I do like to sometimes, this is not national news or international news, but it's fun sometimes to read what we call a tabloid publication, like the New York Post, for fun. If you ever want to just see what's happening in the largest American city in the United States, New York City, check out the New York Post. Their headlines are hilarious. So, but BBC, Reuters would be my, and The Guardian would be my top.
Thank
I
You're
have a
welcome.
question. How do you think can journalists be completely devoid of propaganda?
You have to, I have to, I teach writing. Been doing it for many, many years. And every now and then, I'll particularly if I speak in the community to writers, they think that you just sit in a room and the writing muse lands on your shoulder and somehow you get inspired and you write something. We say in journalism, without a source, you don't have a story. You have to have sources. So the best thing you can do is cultivate quality sources. And you can figure out pretty quickly who are going to do their best to tell you good information. So we have the symbiotic relationship with people we call public relations counselors. We need them, they need us. So you will find out very quickly when they are holding back and not telling you all the information. And over time, we don't, no one uses it anymore, but we used to have this thing called a Rolodex. It was a big circle of people's business cards, and you'd fill this thing up. And you would then, when you were trying to find something else, you would call these people. You have to have sources, and you have to have quality sources. And everywhere you go, I recommend this to you right now. It's not that popular in this part of the world to have a business card, but if possible, when you're anywhere, you know, you don't, it's not necessarily like you're trolling for a date, but you get people's names and their contact information, and you never know, they may be the person that can help you get information that's reliable. The more of those kind of sources that you can cultivate, the better reporter you'll be, the better that publication for which you work, or broadcaster or website will be.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question. What causes bias in journalism?
Could you say that again, please?
What causes bias in journalism?
Ah, now that's a great question. What we say is you are the message. And what that means is you are a collection of experiences through your whole life. So let me just say, make it up. Let's just say you're 22 years old. You're a female. You were raised in a certain part of the world. You had, you may have had a traditional family, a mother and a father. You may have brothers and sisters. You may have had a very good education. You may not have had a very good education. You may have had trauma as you grow up, maybe routine trauma. Kids, children can make fun of each other, or perhaps you were a good athlete and you excelled at so many things. All these things contribute to how you see yourself and how you process information. And if, God forbid, you've been nothing but a success, everything you touch is successful, can you imagine how arrogant you would be and how you would assume that you're the smartest person in the room and everything you know is beyond question? That it could be a real problem. So you need to thank, I do, I hope some of you thank the Lord for all the failures you have. And thank the Lord that you don't get your way all the time, because that helps us realize that, guess what? We don't see the whole picture. And you know, a little thing like you're walking down the hallway at your university and somebody doesn't say hello, and you know, you're not aware, wow, his mother is sick and he just found out, or some other tragedies happen. So we can't control a lot of these things, but what we can control is don't rush to judgment when you are given information by a source, or you're experiencing some information by observation. Give it a minute. Maybe you're not seeing the whole picture, right? The French say to understand, well, you have to overcome your biases and prejudices. And that's just a couple of tips for you. And, you know, part of it's maturity. The more you live, the more you're aware of this kind of thing. And if you have good professors, as you do, he and others will try to help you grow as a thinker. And that maturity can't be minimized. It takes maturity to be able to make good decisions. We say you cannot microwave a life. You got to live it and be aware that you make mistakes. I can thank my parents for teaching me to apologize. I have no problem saying, you know what, I made a mistake, I'm sorry. But how many people do you know that can't do that and refuse to do that? We get it wrong, you know, be honest. I got it wrong, I'm sorry. I'll do better. So that's my suggestion.
Thanks for your answers.
Can I ask you a question? To what extent do you think the political views of editors shape media bias, and how should a journalist strike a balance between personal beliefs and truthful information?
Again, thank you for that question. So we didn't talk about it. There's a lot of assumptions when you have a speaker that's a stranger to you, and how what are the assumptions? So there's a spectrum in journalism, a huge spectrum. It goes from a we could say advocacy, where you're writing to promote a certain idea. You've heard of this. Have you heard of Sierra Club? Sierra Club's in United States, but they're trying to protect wildlife and parks and so on. Or we have another organization called PETA, which wants they don't want you to wear animal fur, for instance, as a code, or eat animal flesh. So when they write their articles and when they publish their magazines and when they get on the website, they're absolutely pushing a certain point of view. I work sometimes for a publication called Magazine Training International. It's a Christian organization, and their whole point is to try to get readers, audiences to be thinking about the gospel, which you may or may not have run into, but the gospel says that Jesus is Lord and he's the way to salvation. That's considered advocacy. That's very different from the other end of the spectrum, which is all we're going to tell you are facts. And so United States, we have this program called C-SPAN. And what they do is they set up the camera, particularly in our Capitol, where we have the Congress and the Senate, and the camera just shows what somebody's saying. They call it the well. They're at the well and they're looking. And this is identify who's speaking. And Senator Joe is talking about the bill. And so they don't give you any more insight than that. Of early on, what is considered the type of information that is most helpful is somewhere in the middle, where you do your best to tell the information. And it may sound like it's impossible, but I've worked at many publications. Every now and then I try to figure out how many stories I've written. I think it's about 3,000. And when you try to write an opinion piece after you've spent your whole career being detached, and you turn in the opinion piece, an editorial commentary, people might say, I don't even know what your opinion is. So it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum of how information is presented. And you, the reader, you, the audience, you have to decode and figure out what is, am I getting advocacy journalism here? We even have these things called peace journalism now, which you may have heard about. Or is it mainstream, kind of middle of the road? Or is it this other thing, which is, I'm not even going to tell you what, I'll just identify the speaker. That's it. I'm not sure I answered your question. Are we still on?
Michael, is it a pause?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for being very absent. Okay. Can you pose a question to our students? Can you pose a question to our students? Can you pose a question to our students? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. You want me to pose a question for the students?
Yeah.
Okay. Students, please tell me the number one, I'm gonna write it down, the number one most reliable source of information that's Ukrainian.
Guys, you may write or voice it. Okay. What do you deem the most reliable source of information in Ukraine or in Ukraine?
Yes, and Ukrainian based.
Regardless of the actual language. Okay. Are there some at least more or less reliable?
I think it's Suspilne media.
Could you, let's see, there is a way to do this. The chat. Yeah. Could you, you wrote it. There it is. Thank you.
Yeah. I cited.
Good. I
cited a recent list of these, and Suspilne is deemed the most reliable.
Good. Oh, I see. Yeah, thank you. Good. Here's another question. You know, the Ukrainian president has been going so strong for so long. In my opinion, he's a very impressive person. But do students feel that he is going overboard in his cheerleading, or is it about right? Or could he do more? Do you understand the question?
Are you speaking about the possible damage he may do? I mean, trying to build an authoritarian rule, or
No. thinking that this really gets back at leadership and persuasion. As you know, he wears typically the army color, the green T-shirt, often to suggest, you know, he's in the battle just like all the other soldiers, which is very effective, symbolic way to represent leadership. But we all struggle with that, where I'm wondering, does he have the right balance, or is he going too far to promote Ukrainian victory, or could he go further? Does he need to do more to using we call it the bully pulpit, to use his role to advance the Ukrainian cause?
I will try to explain the question. If I will ask students if they get it. Друзі, ви зрозуміли, що в чому сутність запитання? Як я зрозумів, то Майкл запитує про те, наскільки задовільною вам здається політика президента, і чи не перегинає він, чи не заходить він надто далеко в акцентуванні української позиції, а можливо він навпаки має робити більше. Будь ласка, хто вважає, можете говорити українською, ми будемо перекладати, пишіть або говоріть голосом англійською, будь ласка. Welcome. Please suggest your opinions. Katarina, Polina?
Yeah, I can say that he's not doing too much right now because all Ukrainians need that support that he's doing. So he's like propagating our victory. So he's supporting our mental health in this case, in this way. So as for me, that he's doing not too much. I'm not sure if it can be more or something like that. So it's just if you do it, so we will see what's gonna be with it. But I think that his political strategy, I don't know how to say that, but it's pretty fine right now, and they like choose the option that Ukrainians need in this time. So, and as I can see right now over social media and over news and people who I'm talking with and who I'm talking to, and all people are okay with it. So I haven't heard that someone said that he's too much or he's doing something wrong. So right now we have like a mainstream or something. I'm not sure that it's okay, but maybe that's fine when we have war or something in our country, and probably people believe in him and he became as an idol. I'm not sure that it's gonna be okay in the nearest future, because if he like not going to the second round of his presidents or something, it can be like a hurt for Ukrainians who really love him. Yes. So I would, yeah. And so, but like, you know, that everyone who becomes an idol, it can be hurt in the future, but for right now, for the like present, probably his politics is fine for Ukrainians.
Excellent, thank you. Do you have any dissenting voices in Ukraine that are the dominant message is this war is just, that is, the Ukrainian cause is just, you must win the war. But do you have, in the United States during the Vietnam War, for instance, we had lots of dissent. We had lots of people saying the war is unjust, we got to get out. Do you run into that in your news at all in Ukraine? Dissent, criticism of the president, criticism of the generals, criticism of, you had outages today, you know, that they're suffering because of this war. I'm genuinely asking the question. I don't know.
Okay, guys, have you got it? запитання про те, чи є в українських медіа зараз якась опозиція президенту, чи, скажімо, чи є хтось, хто сумнівається в справедливості цієї війни і, ну, якби справедливості українського опору, будемо так казати. Окей, будь ласка.
In my opinion, no. Now the media, they are self-censoring very strongly, and they do not allow themselves to seriously criticize the president or the Ukrainian political way.
That's interesting. You use the word self-censorship. I'm teaching a class called International News, and we spend a little bit of time talking about how in a newsroom, at some point, the reporter gives up on presenting a certain story to an editor who makes the decision, because it's just not in its best interest. So I'm guessing the people who are losing family members may have a different opinion about the war, or the men, possibly women that come back with injuries. There may be some criticism, and what I probably suspect is the criticism is not aimed at the Zelensky government. It's aimed at the rest of the world for lack of support in some ways, and so these are things I don't know. That you'll have to tell me.
Michael, thank you so much. We're running out of time. The students have your PowerPoint with your contexts, and contexts. Yeah, so that's why I do believe that we will develop our communication, and it will not end up here, because I believe we should make this a situation which is which Russia tries to position as a death to Ukraine, just the opposite, as the start, as the rise. And that's why we need to communicate. We need to open new horizons, and I do believe in those talented and promising people, young people that participate in this class. Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Please know you have a big friend in LCC. We love Ukraine.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. See you.
Thank
See
you,
Michael.
students.